Good motherfucking afternoon. Um, the roots of Black radicalism, part 2. I'm so excited. Chapter 4: The processes and consequences of Africa's transmutation. Thank you. In the 500 years that have led directly to our moment, the destinies of African peoples have been profoundly affected by the development of economic structures and political institutions among European peoples. Moreover, it has been the nature of these relationships between Africans and Europeans that both Western civilization and the cultures of African peoples have been increasingly contorted and perverted as the years have accumulated. For the West, the appropriation of the means and forces of African reproduction have had unintended and unacceptable significance. The psychic, intellectual, and cultural consequences of Europe's intrusion into African history sorry, I had to burp, have served to accelerate the formulation of the mechanisms of self-destruction inherent in Western civilization, exacerbating its native racisms, compelling further its imperatives for power and totalitarian force, while subverting the possibilities of the rationalization of its states, its diverse cultural particularities, and its classes. Everywhere one turns or cares to look, the signs of a collapsing world are evident. At the center, at its extremities, the systems of Western power are fragmenting. Thus, the British Empire at the beginning of the 20th century, the German Empire in the middle years of this century, and the American Empire today are simultaneously forewarnings, witnesses in the history of this dissolution, and the development of each testify to the characteristic tendency of capitalist societies to amass violence for domination and exploitation, and a diminishing return, a dialectic in its use. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Hopefully. My subject, however, is not primarily the modern Western world and its contortions. Rather, I intend to focus on the centuries of the modern Rather, I tend to focus here on the centuries of the modern world's adolescence and the formation and emergence of African peoples. What's that word? The diminu. Let's look it up, because I'm gonna sound so dumb when I say it out loud. Whoa. Where'd it go? Oh. I-N. Diminution, the reduction in size, extent, or importance of something. The diminution of the diaspora. Before the African and New World Black liberation movements of the post-Second World War era, few Western scholars of the African experience had any conception of the existence of an ideological base or epistemological coherent historical tradition of Black radicalism. The presence of such a tradition, the Western scholars did not understand the whole of African thought, of African intelligence, of African historical traditions of Black radicalism. I was confused for a second. I was like, what? The presence of such a tradition, the possibilities and conditions of its existence were literally and configuratively alien to the observer. Like, it's really interesting seeing how, like, colonizers or Western powers interpret cultures and ideas and just the cultural products of African and indigenous populations. They think of it as like alien, as other, as primitive. And it's like, look at y'all. Anyways, given the presumptions these students of Africa and its diaspora made about the basis of the identities, cultures, ethnicities, and group formations of of these various African peoples, neither space nor time, geography nor periodicity, the period in time in which it was occurred. That's what I'm getting based off of the, what do you call it, structure, led them to suspect the presence of such a tradition. In its stead, these observers reconstructed social and ideological movements among blacks to conform to the exigencies of specific locals. But if it's locals, it would be S, right? Let's look it up. Let's see how it's pronounced. Why would it be ES? Locales. Okay. Oh. And of immediate social causes. If in their mind such movements occasionally were allowed some resemblance to another, this followed from the fact of a general racial order shared by most blacks, whether as slaves or ex-slaves, rather than the presence of a historical political consciousness or a social tradition among blacks. An ideological connective was presumed remote between the African mutineers on the Amistad or the capture of the Diane, the maroon settlements in Pernambuco, Pernambuco, Florida, Virginia, Jamaica, the Green girl. Thank you, Google. Let's look this. GUI. Oh, Guineas. The Guineas region in South America and the Carolinas, the slave revolutionists of the revolution in Haiti, the slave insurrectionists of the Caribbean, and early 19th century America. The black rebels of the region of the Great Fish River, the Limpopo and the Zambezi in southern Africa, the black immigrationists of the American antebellum period, the untold wars across the African landscape in the 1800s and 1900s, and their 20th century successors in Africa and the diaspora. These events were seen as geographically and historically bound acts, episodes connected categorically by the similarity of their sociological elements. Example given, slave or colonial societies, but evidently unrelated in the sense of any emerging social movement inspired by historical experience and a social ideology. Such scholarship, of course, was either inspired or at least influenced by the ideological requirement that modern Western thought obliterate the African. As an ideological current, its adherents were not always European. It permeated the intellectual culture and even compromised the work of some of those African descendants, meaning that Western thought, this is what I'm getting from this. Western thought cannot accurately describe and compose black liberation, black rebellion, African liberation, African rebellion, because Western thought is limited. It does not see the whole picture. It looks at things as individual situations, and does not see the connectedness between it, the intellectual, the sociological, the spiritual connection to black revolt, because Western thought, in Western thought, it's like you got math, science, history, this, that, the third, and how everything is isolated from each other. They don't see the connections, but you need math for science. You need history, you know what I mean? History for psychology. You need history for a lot of things, actually. It's like Western thought does not have the capabilities of accurately, seeing the whole picture. That's what that's, and even though, and people that are trained in the West, like us Americans, we're trained in a Western nation, we have to realize how Western thought has limited our perspective. Think about emotionality. Oh, girl, I was about to go off on a tangent. Look at me go. It permeated the intellectual culture and even compromised the work of some of those African descendants. The pioneering work of black scholars such as C.L.R. James and W.E.B. Du Bois was obviously unacceptable to the orthodox Anglo-American scholastic establishment. The difference was not one of interpretation but comprehension. Yeah, so it doesn't understand. It doesn't understand, like, cultures that are not Western. It doesn't understand the blackness in black thought. It doesn't understand black culture. Think about girl, they not like us, and then these people being like, oh, they not like us, ha ha ha, but it's like, you're the they. And they're like, what? No. What you mean? Respectfully. It's just something that I've seen on TikTok. Because it's a lack of comprehension of what the they is. The makings of an essentially African response. Oh! It's like freedom in America is seen as like individualistic, or wealth is seen as individualistic, whereas freedom and wealth for black people, generally speaking, generally, because we do have outliers, is seen as a collective thing. It's a collective liberation. It's like, I'm not successful if all my homies around me are like looking at me with all my goodies and I'm not sharing, like, you know what I mean? Like, back in the, during when slavery was much more prominent, as if, like, because slavery's still a thing, enslaved black people would run together. They would be like, I'm bringing all my homies out of here. What do y'all mean? You know what I mean? Whereas it was less likely to see, like, no, you could see, like, individual people running away, but it was more likely, to have a communal thing. Like, community is survival, whereas American or Western culture is very individualistic. And because Western thought is also individualistic, it does not have the mental capacities to comprehend the African response. That's what I'm getting from this whole entire paragraph. Okay. No, sometimes I do that because sometimes I'm like, what did you just say? And so it's easier to understand information, at least for myself, when I can break it down and, like, this is what they're saying. I read this. This is what I got from it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes I'm like, huh? Anyways, the difference was not one of interpretation or comprehension. But comprehension. The makings of an essentially African response strewn across the physical and temporal terrain of societies conceived in Western civilization have been so too infrequently distinguished. Only over time has the setting for these events been integrated into the tradition. The social cauldron of black radicalism in Dang, bro, I can't read today. The social cauldron of black radicalism is Western society. Western society, however, has been its location and its I said that right. However, has been its location and its objective condition, but not, except in the most perverse fashion, its specific inspiration. Like, okay, let me just keep reading because that's a really good point. I'll probably write a note on that, or just come back around when we do the summary and I can explain that. Black radicalism is a negation of Western civilization, but not in the direct sense of a simple dialectical negation. It is certain that the evolving tradition of black radicalism owes its peculiar moment to the historical interdiction of African life by European agents. In this sense, the African experience of the past 5 centuries is simply one element in the mesh of European history. some of the objective requirements for Europe's industrial development were met by the physical and mental exploitation of Asian, African, and Native American peoples. This experience, though, was merely the condition for Black radicalism, its immediate reason for an object of being, but not the foundation for its nature or character. Black radicalism, consequently, cannot be understood within the particular context of its genesis. It is not a variant of Western radicalism whose proponents happen to be Black. Rather, it is a specifically African response to an oppression emergent from the immediate determinants of European development in the modern era and framed by orders of human exploitation woven into the intricacies of European social life from the inception of Western civilization. They said, I don't like this. It's like, okay, like when Africans were taken over here, by when they were like trafficked, some of the first revolts, well, some of them, they jumped off the ship. They was like, "You're taking me away from home? No, I'm going home." Oh, I was supposed to order a book for my papa. Homegoing is such a good book, so I need to order that for him. And because it was like, why are you taking us away from home? Home is where my homies are. What are you doing? And then when they touched ground on like the new world, they was like, I'm going to build a community with my homies. We're gonna have fun. I don't have to work for thee. I'm working for me and we, not thee. That's what that's saying to me. No, but actually though, it's like Western Black radicalism is an African response that is in, you know what this book someone just told me, I think it was like African unconscious. I need to write more notes down. I got new sticky notes. Hot. That's real hot. That's real hot. Real hot girl shit. And they're pastel. Come on. But I need to write that book down so I can get it later. What? Pink. I think it was like African unconscious. African unconscious. There's so many books I need to read. Okay. I'd love... Oh, and I got new stickies. Wait, I think I have some already. Sorry. Okay. Let's do pink again. Pink is one of my favorite colors. I like pink, purple, and black. Black because I'm Black. That's been my answer since I was a kid, and it's not going to change. Ever. Okay. I'm going to read that part again, and then we'll go over it, because, yeah. It is not a variant of Western radicalism whose proponents happen to be Black. Like, it's not Marx with Black people. That's what that's saying. Rather, it is a specifically African response. Oh, perfect. Let me write that down. Wait. No, let me just write on it. Not Marx, but Black. Not Black version of Marx. That's a good note. Of Marx. It's African. Period. It's African. No. It's an African response. With reading, I've always had difficulties with reading. Growing up, I was in one of those, I think I said this in a video, I was like in one of those classes after you take like an SOL, and they were like, you don't know how to read. And I'd be like, yeah, I do know how to read. The book is just boring. But what I do, you can see it, because I did read ahead, I didn't read that far ahead, but I put like stickies and highlights and notes because it keeps me engaged. And then if I don't understand something, I try to reread it over and over, or like go over in my head until I can be like, oh, this is what they're saying. You know what I mean? because reading is hard. You have to practice. Rather, it is a specifically African response to an oppression emergent from the immediate determinants of European development in the modern era and framed by orders of human exploitation woven into the intricacies of European social life from the inception of Western civilization. The similar, I think my wash is done. Okay. The similarity of of African survivals in the New World point not to tribal particularities, but to the essential oneness of African culture. I love it. That culture was the shield that frustrated the efforts of Europeans to. That culture was the shield that frustrated the efforts of Europeans to dehumanize Africans through servitude. The slave may have appeared as in a profit and loss account as an item and a thing and a piece of property, but he faced his new situation as an African, a worker, and a man. At this level of perception, it is quite irrelevant to inquire from which tribe or region a particular African originated. As we shall see, in slave society, such a signification of African culture was accessible for practical and ideological reasons only in a most grotesque form, that is, racism. Racist ideologues? How do you say this? Let's look it up. Dang it, I'm not trying to look at people's stories. Ideologues. Ideologues observed that all blacks were identical and supplied the content of the Racist ideologues observed that all blacks were identical and supplied the content of that identity. More important, though, few of the proponents of the philosophical epistemological. Wait, I think that means the origins of thought. Let's make it sure though. The theory of knowledge, especially with regards to its method, validity, and scope. Branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge. Study the nature, origin, and scope of knowledge. Okay, I was right. Or historical traditions of Western culture have found the authentic reality easy to grasp. For longer than the African slave trades to the old or new worlds, the Eurocentric traditions of Western civilization have categorically erred. And though he appeared rather late in his process, Hegel, perhaps somewhat crudely, spoke for these traditions when he declared, the true theater of history is therefore the temperate zone. And further, the peculiarly African character is difficult to comprehend for the very reason that in reference, this is what Hegel is saying. He said it's difficult to comprehend the African character, for the very reason that in reference to it, we must quite give up the principle which naturally accompanies all our ideas, the category of universality. We're going to come back to that because that's really interesting. Another characteristic fact in reference to the Negroes is slavery. Negroes are enslaved by Europeans and sold to America. Bad as this may be, their lot in their own land is even worse, since there as slavery quite as absolute exists, for it is the essential principle of slavery that man has not yet attained a consciousness of his freedom, and consequently sinks down to a mere thing, the object of no value. Like a slave does not want their freedom. A slave does not see that they are not free. They think that they are, you know what I mean? Like they're saying that like a slave has not yet attained the consciousness of its freedom, and then the African revolt is the negation of that, being like, we're free. What do you mean? I have self-determination and self-autonomy. You know what I mean? They're like, no. But what Hegel's is like identifying is that our own thinking is wrong, or does not, it's difficult for us to comprehend because it's different. I'll have to, excuse me, hit the burp. I'll have to come back to that. An object of no value. At this point, we leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. Historical movements in it, that is the northern part, belong to the Asiatic or European worlds. Boring. False. Wrong. He's so ugly for that. Except perhaps in its form of expression, the Eurocentrism that Hegel displays in these passages have proven to be neither anarchistic or idiosyncratic. I think I said that right, but I don't know. Anachronistic. I did not say that right. Anachronistic means belonging to a period rather than being portrayed. Oh, excuse me. Belonging to a period other than that being portrayed. Belonging or appropriate to an earlier period. Okay. Idiosyncratic. Oh, I said that right. Relating to idiosyncrasy, particular or individual. Having strange or unusual habits, ways of behaving, or features. He would be echoed by legions of European scholars and their non-European. EPIGOM. No. Oh, a follower. I don't know how to pronounce it though. Ipingyong, meaning follower, disciple, also an inferior intimidator. In a myriad of ways, but in ways into the present century, the tradition persisted and permutated. Such was the care. Oh my gosh, I still have dry skin a little bit around my face. You can kind of see it here. Such was the character of the world consciousness that dominated thought in Western Europe. Its origins, as we have seen in Part 1, were intra-European rather than a reflex of encounters between Europeans and non-Europeans. Indeed, the social base to which the conception was a response assumed its sociological forms more than a millennium before the advent of an extensive European trade in African workers, and they were not easily displaced even by the 18th century. This cultural tradition of moral and social order that rested on racial distinctions was nevertheless readily available for the extension to Asian, African, and other non-European peoples when it became appropriate. With respect to the African, that occasion presented itself in the trade that saw its most bountiful fruits in the New World. Per